Hello everyone, I'm very glad to be at the Seeds Conference 2020 and that it's been able to go ahead online. I'm doing this study on calls for new theory and comparing that with contemporary issues. It's a desktop study and calls from aspects of my developing PhD, and it looks at calls for new theory and concludes by suggesting one. Several academic writers have for the best part of 20 years been showing that there is something wrong with the way we describe the management of projects and a lack of theoretical underpinning is a persistent source issue. Of course, projects as relatively unique pieces of work are subject to variability in outcome, and there's more to the criticism than this. One possible explanation is that project management has not been fully thought through in the light of actual experience. And here in this slide I'm demonstrating that it borrows hugely and often without reference to sources of earlier management philosophies and techniques, like for instance supply chain management, operations management, and so on. Project management can be seen to hold on to all of these disparate sources and say, well, and sometimes say, oh, we'll use them at different times. That makes sense, I suppose. Recently, writers have shown that project management doesn't fit comfortably with how practitioners experience projects. And here's a list of damning contemporary approaches to projects that contemporary projects are saddled with. And they're intended to help, but they generally make things worse. Much of them can be attributed to the deterministic planning assumptions. So here I'm highlighting that in this slide. What I mean by that is the idea that you plan something and then it works out in the way that you expected it to. And if it doesn't, then your planning was wrong in some way. That's quite problematic. I've got stakeholder management and the link to strategy here in blue ink because those things are quite associated with perhaps uniquely project management things, but almost everything else comes from earlier management philosophies. Okay then, so we've got a deterministic approach. We plan something and it turns out the way, or we've planned badly. That's never how it is, and that truism is not something that project management has got around to properly understanding for practice. Literature has sought explanations for project management's issues by looking at non-deterministic realities. And a colleague of mine, Alan, refers to non-deterministic perspectives as the probability perspective. So the idea that plans should be probable and outcomes are probable, not determined. Okay. So I've taken a grounded theory approach because this offers a way to construct new theory from the interpretation of field data and what's already there. I've used contemporary issues illustrated from practice and calls for new theory from literature sources. Okay, looking at some of those, picking out a few headlines from the paper. Here we see Koskela and Howells. Their paper was called "The Theory of Project Management is Obsolete," and they suggested that they broke down existing theories of project management. What's perhaps interesting in here is that projects might be about value generation. Also, other people have talked about theories of complexity that might be about understanding projects as social processes rather than anything harder engineering than that. Again, value creation, but also, and that would, if we think about value creation, that would lead to a broader conceptualization of projects, and that project managers then, when they're doing things, would be more reflective rather than merely organising the process, the flow of work. I've also looked at some other work with a review done by Sevjig and Anderson, and they also mention things like moving towards value creation, and the idea that projects might be drivers of innovation. Another source I used was Dalcher, and in here he talked again about value. It's linked to strategy. This he thought would lead to longer term thinking and innovation, all of which are issues which strike a chord with sustainability concepts. Some of the postgraduates I've worked with and have presented at previous SEEDS conference have addressed some of these issues in more detail. Modelling for analysis, as happens in some approaches to innovation, is a rethinking of what planning is. Also, value creation comes up, and the idea that stakeholders, so people who are interested and affected by the project, are managed and variously negotiated with the goal of protecting and creating valued outcomes. This leads me to a potential new theory of project with implications for how we might manage them. Projects seek to create a valued outcome as defined through facilitating a negotiation with the open social system that comprises both internal to the organisation, the host of the project, the strategic issues, and external interests, so social and political interests on outside of the organisation, but in the marketplace and in the public sector marketplace as well. Acknowledging that this will lead to emergent multiple outcomes from necessarily multiple and innovative possibilities. So instead of assuming that this is what we're going to do, then project management will look innovatively around for things that we might do, and that would move project management as a practice much more firmly towards innovation as being part of that whole problem solving, rather than just being about building a thing. Thank you very much.